The council chamber was silent when Kelith walked inside with her dragon Ashrak following close behind her. And the elven lords sitting in their high seats looked nervous, even though they had called her here to answer for what she had done, and they watched her silver hair move like water down her back while her armor caught the firelight from the torches on the walls, and Ashrak made the floor shake with each step of his massive claws against the stone, and nobody wanted to speak first. Because they all remembered the old stories about what happened to those who angered her, Kindveron stood up from his seat at the center of the council, and his voice shook just a little when he spoke to her, and told her that she was accused of breaking the oldest law that all elves must follow, and he said, she had let a human live past his time, and worse than that, she had trained him in their ways and made him into something dangerous, and all the other council members nodded their heads. In agreement, while whispering to each other about what punishment she deserved for such crimes against their people, Clith looked at each of them with her green eyes that had seen empires rise and fall across thousands of years, and she did not look afraid or sorry for what she had done, and Ashrak growled deep in his chest, making a sound that went through the walls and into the bones of everyone present, and she had known this day would come eventually because for 300 years she had hunted humans like all of her kind were supposed to do, and humans were meant to be prey and nothing more than that, and they lived their short lives and died in the galaxy. It stayed balanced the way it was supposed to. But then she had found him bleeding in the wreckage of a destroyed colony ship, and he was the only one left alive after the Krell had attacked and killed everyone else. And something about his eyes made her stop before her blade could end his life. And maybe it was the way he showed no fear when he should have been terrified, or maybe it was how he smiled at death itself, like it was an old friend and against everything she had been taught and every promise she had made. She decided to let him live. She spoke clearly so everyone could hear her words, and said his name was Cole Harper, and they should pray to whatever gods they still believed in, that they would never have to face what he had become after learning from her. And the chamber erupted with angry voices shouting at her and calling her a traitor and demanding she be punished, but she simply turned around and walked toward the door with Ashrak following, and behind them the council kept yelling, but their words meant nothing because they did not understand what was happening in the galaxy and how humanity was waking up from a long sleep. Cole was waiting in the shadows outside the council chamber, and his human body looked small next to the massive walls built by elves long ago. But when Kelith came out, he started walking beside her without saying anything, and Ashrak lowered his huge head to look at Cole with one golden eye, showing the respect he gave to no other living creature except Kelith herself. Cole spoke quietly and said they would send hunters after them now, and Kelith agreed and said let them come because it did not matter anymore, and she remembered how the council had asked her once what hunted humans in this part of space, and she had told them that nothing hunted humans anymore. And she looked at Cole walking beside her and smiled just a little, because soon the council would learn why she had said those words and what they really meant. They walked through the long corridors of the elven stronghold, and Cole moved with a grace that no human should have possessed, and his steps were silent like hers, and any elf watching would have been shocked to see a human move that way. But there was nobody around to see them leave, and they made their way out into the night where their ship was waiting for them. Kelith thought about the first time she had seen Cole lying in the ruins with blood covering his clothes, and how young he had looked even though humans aged so quickly compared to her kind, and she remembered making the choice to help him instead of ending his life, and how that single moment of mercy had changed everything for both of them. And now 300 years later, he was still alive because she had taught him the secrets of elven longevity and combat skills and ways of thinking that took most elves centuries to master. Cole had been a fast learner, and he soaked up everything. Showed him like dry ground drinking rain, and he practiced until his hands bled, and then practiced more, and he never complained or gave up, even when the training nearly killed him multiple times and she had started to see him not as prey but as something else entirely. And Ashrak had bonded with him too, which was unheard of because dragons only bonded with elves and never with humans. The night air was cold when they reached their ship, and it was a small vessel built for speed rather than comfort, and they had been living on it for years now, moving from place to place and staying ahead of those who wanted to capture or kill them. And Cole climbed aboard first, and started the engine systems. While Keleth looked back at the stronghold one last time, knowing she would probably never return here again, Shrek spread his wings and launched himself into the sky, and he would follow their ship as he always did. And his black scales made him nearly invisible against the darkness, and Keleth watched him fly for a moment before entering the ship and closing the door behind her, and she found Cole already in the pilot seat, running through the pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, sat down beside him, and they lifted off smoothly and left the planet behind. And as they broke through the atmosphere, Cole said they needed to find the others and warn them that the council was going to take action, and Keleth nodded because she knew he was right, and there were other humans scattered across many worlds who had been preparing for this moment, and some of them Cole had trained himself, passing on what Keleth had taught him. The stars surrounded them as they jumped into faster-than-light travel, and Keleth closed her eyes and thought about how strange her life had become and how she had gone from being a respected hunter to an outcast and traitor, and yet she felt no regret about her choices because Cole had shown her that humans were not the weak prey species everyone believed them to be. Cole broke the silence and asked her if she was okay, and she opened her eyes and looked at him and said she was fine. And he smiled that same smile he had given Death all those years ago, said they would get through this together like they always did. And she believed him, because in 300 years he had never let her down. Shrek flew beside their ship, and his presence was comforting even though they were heading into danger, and Keleth knew the council would not give up easily, and they would send their best hunters to track them down and bring them back for punishment, or simply eliminate them if capture proved too difficult. She also knew something the council did not know, and that was how many humans Cole had found and trained over the years, and how they had been building their strength in secret and waiting for the right moment to show the galaxy that they were no longer prey, and that moment was coming soon, whether the council was ready for it or not. 3 days passed before the hunting party found them on the red plains of Talamar, and there were 5 hunters all riding war beasts and carrying weapons that could cut through steel like paper, and they moved with the deadly grace that came from living for hundreds of years and perfecting the art of killing. The leader of the hunters was named Celine, and she was famous across many worlds for ending human uprisings, and she had personally killed more human leaders than anyone else in the elven military, and her name was spoken with fear, even by humans who had never seen her face. And now she stood on a ridge, looking down at the camp where Keleth and Cole had made their fire. Celine told her team to remember their orders and said they needed to capture Keleth alive if they could, but the human had to die. The dragon should not be bothered unless he attacked them first, and our hunters nodded and checked their weapons and prepared to descend on the camp. Like shadows, they moved down the hillside expecting to catch Cole by surprise, but instead they found him sitting alone by the fire, and he was sharpening a simple blade that looked old and primitive, and he glanced up when they surrounded him, and Celine saw no fear in his eyes, and that made her uncomfortable because prey should be afraid when cornered. Cole spoke calmly and said that Keleth had told him they would come, and he said she had wanted to spare them, but he had explained to her that mercy had limits. And Celine commanded him to surrender and promised his death would be quick if he cooperated. Cole stood up slowly, and Celine noticed for the first time all the scars covering his arms, and each scar told a story of surviving something that should have killed him. And he said that 300 years ago, the elves had decided humans were prey and had hunted them across the stars and kept them scattered and afraid and never let them grow beyond small colonies, and the elves thought humans would stay prey forever. One of the hunters spat at Cole and said humans did stay prey and always would be prey. And Cole smiled, but it was not a friendly smile, and he raised his hand, and the firelight showed strange patterns woven into his skin, and they were elven combat marks that took centuries to learn, and no human should have known how to use them. Cole it said they were prey in the past, but not anymore, and he told them that Keleth had taught him everything the elves knew and everything they were, and that he was not alone anymore. And as he spoke, the ground began to shake. A shack exploded from beneath the sand where he had been hiding, and his roar shook the sky and made the hunting party stumble backward. And Keleth appeared from her concealment with twin blades in her hands, and they sang as she moved, and Cole launched himself forward with speed that should not be possible for any human. The fight lasted less than 20 seconds, and when it ended, Celine found herself on her knees with her weapon broken into pieces on the ground, and her team was unconscious around her and not dead but defeated completely, and Cole stood over her breathing normally like the fight had been nothing difficult. Keleth and Ashrak stood on either side of Cole like ancient guardians, protecting something precious, and Celine had never felt so helpless in her entire long life. And Cole spoke quietly and said he was letting her live because she needed to deliver a message to the council. He told her to say that humanity was no longer scattered or afraid, and that humans had been watching and learning and building. While everyone thought they were broken, and he said they had an excellent teacher, and glanced at Keleth with something warm in his eyes and said the hunt was over, not because humans asked nicely, but because they had become apex predators themselves. Selena looked up at him and finally understood what Keleth had seen in this human all those years ago when she made the choice to let him live, and it was not just the ability to survive or the defiance in the face of death, but the terrible potential of a species that refused to accept the place others had chosen for them. She asked him what he was, and her voice came out as a whisper, and Cole kept smiling and said he was human, and then added that he was just evolved, and his words hit her like a physical blow because she realized he was telling the truth. Celine watched as they packed their camp and prepared to leave, and Cole gave her a canteen of water and some food, even though she had come to kill him, and he said she had a long walk back to her ship, and she should take care of herself, and his kindness made everything worse somehow after they left. Celine sat alone on the Red Plains with her unconscious team around her, and she thought about what she would tell the council, and how they would react when they learned that their prey had teeth now, and knew how to use them when her team finally woke up. They were confused and ashamed, and wanted to pursue Cole and Keleth immediately, but Celine stopped them and said they needed to return and report what had happened, and one of her hunters argued that they could not go back in defeat. But Celine said this was not defeat but reconnaissance, and they had learned something vital about their enemy. The journey back took 4 days, and Celine used that time to think about everything she had seen and how Cole moved with elven grace and fought with elven technique and carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was, and she thought about the scars on his arms and what they said represented. Each scar was a lesson learned the hard way, and each lesson had made him stronger, and 300 years of lessons had created something new and something the elves were not prepared to face, and Celine wondered how many other humans Cole had trained and how long they had been preparing for this moment. They finally reached the council chambers. Celine stood before the same lords who had judged Keleth days before, and she delivered her report and told them everything she had witnessed, and at first they did not believe her and said, "No human could move that fast or fight that well," but Celine insisted and showed them recordings from her armor, and the council members watched in silence as Cole dismantled their best hunting party in seconds, and they saw Keleth fighting beside him as an equal. And they saw Ashrak rising from the sand like a nightmare made real. Varan asked what they should do, and his voice had lost its strength from before, and Celine said they needed to take this seriously and stop thinking of humans as prey, because that time was over, and if they did not adapt, they would lose everything. One council member suggested sending the military to crush the human settlements before they could organize, but Celine shook her head and said it was already too late for that, and Cole had said humans were no longer scattered, and that meant they were already organized and waiting. The council argued among themselves for hours while Celine stood and watched, and she thought about Cole telling her the hunt was over, and how he had smiled when he said it, and she knew in her bones that he was right and everything was about to change. Whether the elves wanted it to or not, finally Varen dismissed her and told her to rest and prepare because they would need her again soon, and Celine left the chamber and walked through the same corridors Keleth had walked days before, and she wondered if she would end up making the same choice Keleth had made. The message that Celine brought back caused panic among the elven leaders, and they called emergency meetings and opened old archives that had not been touched in centuries and sent orders to mobilize defensive fleets across multiple star systems. But it was Admiral Lyssa who truly understood what they were facing. She stood on the bridge of the largest elven warship and studied holographic reports coming in from across the galaxy, and human colonies that had been silent for hundreds of years were suddenly sending signals, and simple settlements were showing hidden shipyards underneath the ground, and scattered survivors were coordinating with military precision that spoke of careful planning. Admiral Lissa asked her intelligence officer how many humans there were, and the officer said conservative estimates put the number at 17 million across 400 systems, but the real number could be much higher. Because they had been hiding so well and letting everyone think they were still broken, and weak Lisa turned to look at the tactical display, and her centuries of military experience told her what her pride did not want to accept, and she realized humans had been preparing for war for a very long time, and someone had been organizing them and training them and giving them technology and tactics they should not have possessed. Her intelligence officer said the coordination patterns suggested planning going back at least 50 years, and someone had been at 50 years and someone had been at the center of it all, and Lissa thought about Keleth, the legendary hunter who had become a traitor, and she thought about one elf teaching one human, and how that should not have been enough to threaten an entire civilization unless that human had been teaching others and spreading what he learned. Lissa gave orders to find Keleth and her dragon and the human Cole Harper, and she said she did not care what it cost to locate them and bring them in. But even as she spoke those words, the first attacks began, and this time it was not human colonies being raided, but elven outposts going dark. A listening post on the edge of Krell space simply stopped transmitting, and when they sent a ship to investigate, they found the station intact, but empty, and all the personnel were gone, and there was a message written on the main view screen that said the hunt was over. A garrison world reported intruders in the night, and then went silent, and a patrol fleet investigating strange signals in an asteroid field never returned, and every survivor who made it back told the same story. It's about shadows that moved too fast to see, and weapons that struck from impossible distances. And at the center of every attack, there were reports of 3 figures moving together, and survivors described an ancient elf with silver hair, and a dragon made of living darkness, and a human who smiled at death and fought like nothing they had ever seen before. Lissa realized with growing horror that they were not just facing a rebellion, but facing the consequences of their own arrogance, weaponized and returned with interest. And the elves had taught humanity to fear, and Keleth had taught humanity to fight, and Cole Harper had taught humanity too. When her communications officer called out with a trembling voice, and said they were receiving a transmission addressed to Admiral Lissa personally, and she told them to put it on the main view screen, and then found herself staring at Cole Harper. Sitting in what appeared to be a command center, he sat calmly while human crew members worked efficiently around him. Behind him stood Keleth, with an unreadable expression on her ancient face, and through an open doorway Lissa could see Ashrak. Watching with golden eyes that seemed to look directly at her, Cole spoke pleasantly and said he had heard about Admiral Lissa and how she was the one who ordered the massacre at New Providence, where 3,000 humans died, including children, because she suspected them of hiding weapons, and his smile never reached his eyes when he spoke about Eth. Told her he wanted her to understand something important, and said this was not revenge, because revenge would be pointless, and instead this was evolution. And he explained that the elves had kept humans down and scattered and afraid for 3 centuries, and they had done it so well that they forgot a fundamental truth about humans. Cole leaned forward, and Lissa felt something cold move down her spine as he continued speaking, and said humans were the species that domesticated wolves and looked at the stars and decided they belonged to humanity and turned every step back into a stepping stone forward. He said the elves did not destroy humans, but just gave them 300 years to remember what they were. And he stood up, and Skleeth placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of solidarity that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. Cole finished by saying the hunt was over and the war had begun, and this time humans were not the prey, and the transmission ended, leaving Lissa staring at an empty screen and feeling for the first time in her long life what it meant to be hunted instead of the hunter. She called her senior officers together, and they discussed what to do, and some suggested immediate military action, while others wanted to negotiate and find a peaceful solution. But Lissa knew that time for peaceful solutions had passed long ago when the elves decided to keep humans as prey. One of her officers asked if they should recall all fleets and consolidate their forces for a defensive position, but Lissa shook her head and said that would leave their colonies exposed and vulnerable, and besides, Cole had shown he could strike anywhere he wanted without warning another. Officers suggested finding where the humans were gathering and hitting them with overwhelming force before they could fully organize. But Lissa pointed out that Cole had already organized them and had been doing so for years, and any attack now would just unite them further. Meeting went on for hours, and Lissa felt the weight of command pressing down on her, and she thought about all the decisions she had made over her long career and wondered if things could have been different if the elves had treated humans with more respect from the beginning. Finally, she dismissed her officers and stood alone on the bridge watching the stars and thinking about Cole Harper and how one human had managed to become such a threat, and she realized it was not just about him, but about what he represented. He represented every human who had been hunted and killed, and every colony that had been destroyed, and every child who grew up in fear, and now all that pain and anger had found a focus and a leader, and that was more dangerous than any weapon Lissa pulled up information about. Cole and learned he had been the sole survivor of a colony ship attack 300 years ago, and Keleth had found him, and for some reason decided to spare his life, and everything that followed came from that single moment of mercy. She wondered what Keleth had seen in him that made her break every law and oath she had sworn, and looking at the recordings of Cole in combat, Lissa thought she understood, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of an unbreakable will and a refusal to surrender, even when surrender was the logical choice. The reports kept coming in through the night, and more outposts went dark, and more patrols disappeared, and each time the message was the same, and the hunt was over, and humanity was done being prey, and Lissa knew they were running out of time to find a solution. She thought about contacting Cole directly and trying to negotiate, but she knew he would not trust her after what happened at New Providence, and she had made that decision believing it was necessary to maintain order, and now she saw the cost of that choices. Dawn broke over the ship. Lissa made her decision and called her fleet commanders and told them to prepare for full military mobilization, and they would face the human threat with overwhelming force and either crush it completely or die trying. And there was no middle ground anymore. She knew this would lead to terrible losses on both sides, but she could not see another way forward, and the council was demanding action, and her own pride demanded that she not back down from a challenge, even one as dangerous as this. But deep inside, where she did not let anyone see, Lissa wondered if they had already lost, and if Cole was right about evolution and humanity had evolved beyond prey and become predators, and if that was true, then the elves were facing an enemy they could not defeat with traditional warfare. The message from Cole reached Earth's hidden command center deep beneath the ice of a frozen moon, and Lauren Cross watched the broadcast with mixed feelings of pride and worry, and around her the assembled leaders of humanity underground government erupted in cheers and celebration. General Marcus Stone stood beside her, and his grandfather had died in the New Providence massacre, and he said Cole had actually done it and declared war on the Elven Council, and Lauren corrected him quietly and said Cole had declared inevitability instead, and there was an important difference between the two. She pulled up tactical maps showing humanity true strength across the galaxy, and for 300 years they had played the role assigned to them and acted scattered and primitive, while secretly building and learning and preparing for this exact moment. Every attack by elven hunters had been carefully documented and studied and turned into training materials, and every piece of stolen technology had been taken apart and reverse engineered and improved upon, and every human colony that seemed to die had instead gone deep underground and waited. But it was Keleth's defection that had changed everything and given humans real hope, and an elven war master teaching human commanders was invaluable, and ancient dragon bonding techniques shared with human pilots opened new possibilities and secrets of faster-than-light travel that the elves had hidden for thousands of years were now in human hands. She had given humanity the tools to fight, but more importantly, she had given them proof that the elves were not invincible and could be beaten, and that knowledge was worth more than any weapon or technology? Laurent asked about the status of their secret project, and her chief engineer replied that it was 93% complete, and the fleet would be ready to launch in 72 hours, and thanks to modifications Keleth had provided, their ships would be faster and better. Armed than anything the elves could, Field Lauren nodded, but her attention was drawn to another screen, showing incoming vessels and ships, bearing marks of many different species were arriving, and there were Krell warriors who had been enslaved by the elves for generations, and Solarian refugees whose worlds had been taken, and even a group of young elves who were tired of their council endless wars. All of them impossibly were uniting under a single banner, and Keleth had done more than just teach humans to fight, and she had shown the entire galaxy that the Elven Council could be defied and defeated. Day. Priority alert flashed across Lauren's screen, and it was an encrypted communication using Keleth's personal code, and she opened it immediately and heard the ancient elf voice speaking with urgent psycholith. Said the council was mobilizing their full military might, and Admiral Lissa was a brilliant tactician, would not underestimate humans a second time, and they needed to strike now before the elves could consolidate their forces in one place. Lauren protested and said they were not ready yet, and their secret project was not complete, and they needed more time to prepare. But Keleth interrupted her and said there was no more time left. Keleth explained that she had lived for over 2,000 years and seen civilizations rise and fall, and the Elven Council was ancient and powerful and terrified, and they would burn every human world to ash before allowing humans to threaten their supremacy, and Lauren did not have the luxury of perfect preparation. Cole's voice joined the transmission, and he agreed with Keleth, said he had been hitting Elven supply lines and communication networks, and their confidence. But Admiral Lissa was rallying their forces, and if humans gave her time to position her fleets properly, everything they had built would die in the void. Between stars, Laurent looked around at her team and saw fear and determination in their eyes. And 300 years of preparation was coming down to a single decision, and she had to choose between launching early and risking catastrophic failure, or waiting and risking total annihilation. Cole added with a hint of warmth in his voice that Ashrak sent his greetings and wanted Lauren to know that dragons did not wait for perfect conditions before they flew, and instead they leaped and trusted their wings to carry. Then Lauren made her decision and ordered the countdown to begin for their secret project, and told all human fleets to move to attack positions, and said someone should get her a direct line to their allies, because if they were doing this, they would make sure every species that had ever been stepped on by the elves knew it was time to stand up. She closed the communication channel and allowed herself one moment of doubt and fear, and then she thought about New Providence and 3 centuries of living in fear, and children growing up and hiding, never seeing the sun. And she thought about Cole Harper, who should have died 300 years ago, but instead became a symbol of everything humanity could become. Laurent spoke softly and repeated the words that had become humanity rallying cry, and said they asked what hunts humans, and now they were about to show the galaxy the answer, and the answer was nothing anymore, because humans had become the hunters. Next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity, and ships launched from hidden bases, and crews that had trained in secret for decades finally got to use their skills, and weapons that had been built in underground factories were distributed to fighters who had waited their entire lives for this moment. Lauren watched the fleet assembling through the view screen and felt pride swell in her chest, and these were not scattered refugees or primitive colonists, but a proper military force built from determination and sacrifice, and taught by the best teacher they could have asked for. Messages came in from their allies, and the Krell sent 3 battle groups, and the Solarians contributed their fast attack craft, and the rebel elves brought knowledge of defensive systems and weak points in council ships, and together they formed something the galaxy had never seen before, a true coalition of species, united not by conquest, but by a shared desire for freedom. And Lauren thought about how the elves had tried to keep everyone separate and weak, and instead had created the conditions for this alliance to form. In the day of launch, Lauren stood before her assembled commanders and spoke to them about what they were about to do. She reminded them they were not fighting for revenge, but for the future, and for their children, and Every species that had suffered under elven dominance, she told them, Cole and Keleth and Ashrak, would be leading the assault and drawing the elven fleet into position, and their job was to hit hard and fast and not give Admiral Lyssa time to reorganize. And most importantly, they had to protect the civilian transports that were actually hidden weapons platforms. The commanders saluted and returned to their ships, and Lauren watched them go and felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. And she knew some of them would not return, and that thought hurt, but she also knew they were doing something necessary, and Right Killith contacted her one more time before the battle and said she was proud of what humanity had become, and that 300 years ago, when she found Cole bleeding in the ruins, she could never have imagined it would lead to this moment. Lauren thanked her for everything she had done and said humanity would never forget the elf who had given them a chance to be more than prey, and Keleth replied that she had not given them anything except knowledge, and humans had done the rest themselves through determination and sacrifice. Cole appeared on the screen beside Keleth and said they would see each other after the battle, and Lauren should not worry because they had trained for this and prepared for this, and now it was time to show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped being afraid. The transmission ended, and Lauren gave the final order, and the fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel and headed toward the war coordinates, where Admiral Lyssa was gathering her forces, and the Battle of Meridian Gate was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Battle of Meridian Gate would be remembered for 1,000 years as the moment everything changed in the galaxy, and 70 elven warships, commanded by Admiral Lyssa herself, faced a mixed fleet of human vessels and Krell dreadnoughts and Solarian skirmishers and rebels from many species, and on paper, the elves should have won easily, but they had not counted on Cole Harper and what he had become after 300 years of learning from the greatest warrior the elves had ever produced. He stood on the bridge of the human flagship while Keleth stood beside him, coordinating a battle that stretched across 3 star systems, and through the viewport he could see Shrak leading a wing of human pilots and ships that had been designed using dragonflight patterns, and the dragon roar was transmitted across all communication channel. Skeleth observed calmly that Admiral Lyssa was positioning her flagship for an antimatter barrage, and she was targeting the refugee transports that appeared to be fleeing the battle, and Cole's expression did not change as he called out to Lauren and told her to execute their special protocol across the battlefield. What the elves had assumed were civilian transports suddenly dropped their disguises, and each one was actually a weapons platform built in secret shipyards and armed with technology that combined human creativity, elven precision, and they opened fire at the same moment, and the elven formation buckled under the unexpected. A salted Moralissa voice crackled across the communication channel, broadcasting directly to Cole's ship, and she said he had taught humans this tactic of deception and misdirection, and these were not human strategies. Cole agreed pleasantly and said no, they were predator strategies, and humans used to think honor meant standing up and fighting fair. But Keleth had taught them that real honor meant protecting your pack by any means necessary, and humans were very fast learners. When properly motivated, the battle raged for 3 hours, and ships burned and exploded, and brave fighters on both sides gave their lives in the void filled with debris and drifting hulls and emergency signals. But slowly and inevitably, the tide turned against the elves. The elven ships were more advanced and had better shields and stronger weapons, but they had been designed for fights against scattered colonies and not coordinated fleets. In every tactic Admiral Lyssa deployed, Cole had an answer. For because Keleth had spent 300 years teaching him exactly how elven admirals thought and planned, Lyssa finally ordered all vessels to fall back to defensive positions and prepare to retreat. And her voice was tight with something that might have been respect for an enemy who had beaten her at her own game. Cole transmitted to her and said he was offering terms for ending the battle, and the entire battlefield fell silent as ships held their positions with weapons armed but not firing, and Lauren Cross, watching from command center, held her breath waiting. Admiral Lyssa asked carefully what terms he was offering, and Cole looked at Keleth, who nodded once, giving him permission to speak for both of them. Cole said the hunt had to end permanently, and humanity must be recognized as a sovereign species with all rights and protections, and all enslaved species must be released immediately, and the Elven Council must surrender their monopoly on advanced technology and He paused before adding that those elves who wanted peace were welcome to help build something better. Lisa asked what would happen if the council refused his terms. An Ashrak roar split the darkness of space, and simultaneously, hundreds of human ships powered up weapons that should not have existed, and there were jump-capable missile platforms in reality. Warping torpedoes that bent space itself into the center of the formation was a weapon Keleth had described but never thought humans would be crazy enough to actually build, and it was a star-killer device capable of making suns go supernova. Cole spoke quietly and said then they would prove that humans had learned another lesson from the elves, and that survival sometimes required terrible choices, and humans did not want to be monsters, but they would be whatever they needed to be to ensure their children never had to hide against the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, and then Admiral Lissa's ship began broadcasting a stand-down signal, and one by one the elven fleet powered down their weapons and accepted defeat. Lisa said the council would never accept these terms peacefully, and Cole knew she was right, but Keleth spoke for the first time during the negotiation, and her voice carried the weight of 2,000 years of life. She said then the council would fall and be replaced by something better, and she had lived too long watching her people grow stagnant and cruel, and perhaps it was time for change, and time for all species to learn from each other instead of hunting each other. Treaty negotiations took 3 weeks, and humans and elves and representatives from dozens of species gathered to hammer out the details, and in the end, the Elven Council was dissolved and replaced by a federation that included everyone who wanted to participate. It was not perfect, and there would be resistance and conflict and years of difficult adjustments, but it was a start, and it was better than the alternative. A endless Warcole stood on the observation deck of the new Federation headquarters, watching ships from 100 worlds docking in peace, and he felt Kella's presence beside him as she joined him at the window. He asked if she regretted everything she had given up to teach him and all the things she had sacrificed by breaking her oaths and becoming a traitor to her own people. Keleth was quiet for a long moment, and below them in the massive landing bay a shock was curled up resting, and he opened one golden eye, as if considering the question himself before going back to sleep. She finally said she had spent 2,000 years as a hunter and thought that was what she was meant to be. That was her purpose in life. But then she found Cole bleeding and defiant and refusing to die, and she realized something important. The greatest privilege of a long life was the chance to change and become something better than what you were before, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. The same gesture she had made in his broadcast to Admiral Keleth said. Cole had asked her once what hunted humans, and she had told him nothing did anymore, but the truth was more complex than that simple answer. Nothing hunted humans because they had proven they were not prey, and they were survivors and innovators, and yes, when necessary they were warriors, but most importantly, they were the species that offered peace. When they could have taken revenge, Cole smiled, and for the first time in 300 years the smile reached his eyes and made him look almost young again, and he said they had a good teacher and could not have done any of this without her below. Them ships from Earth began docking and carrying families who had lived in hiding for generations, and children who would grow up seeing the stars not as threats but as possibilities and opportunities. A new era was beginning, built on the ruins of the old hunt and the old fears, and Cole thought about how one moment of mercy 300 years ago had led to all of this. Keleth had chosen to let him live when she should have killed him, and that choice had rippled outward, changing the fate of billions and proving that sometimes the smallest decisions had the largest consequences. In the shadows of that new dawn, an ancient elf and a dragon of living night and a human who had refused to stay prey watched together as the future unfolded, and they were guardians of the peace they had fought so hard to create. The hunt was over, and the war had ended, and the future stretched out before them, full of challenges and possibilities, and neither the galaxy nor any of the species in it would ever be the same again, and that was exactly how it should be.